There are a lot of different things that I could do, so you might be wondering, why do I spend so much time on games? And part of the reason is that they're fun, and I enjoy doing them, of course. But um, another reason is that they also have a clearer goal than a lot of other things that you're going to end up doing. So a game has a very clear definition of how to play, and then of how to tell if you won or lost. It's very well defined what that means. So at the end of a game, you know if you won or lost, and there's no doubt about that. And that's not always the case for things in the real world. For example, imagine if you were trying to create an app on the App Store or something like that. How do you know if you created a successful app or not? There's some obvious cases of like if it does everything you want it to do and it gets a lot of positive reviews and a lot of people download it and makes a lot of money and all of that. Well, that's pretty obviously a successful app. And on the other hand, if it doesn't really work, it's kind of broken, no one downloads it, no one likes it, doesn't make any money, that's pretty obviously not a successful app. But there's a lot more to it than just that. So there's a lot of different ways it can be divided where, for example, you could buy code for a clone game, like a game that's already out there that's pretty simple, and you could buy code to make that same game, and then you could pay to fake reviews, and then if you do it well enough, even if your game is kind of buggy, you didn't write the code, it doesn't do anything new, it's just a copy of something else that's already out there. But if you find a way to play the system better and you do a really good job of getting those positive reviews, you can get a whole bunch of downloads and a whole bunch of likes and stuff like that, and you can make a whole bunch of money. And I'm not necessarily sure if that's still the case, but I do know in the past I've seen some games where it's like one game is the exact copy of another game or of another idea that I've seen before, but for some reason it just has a whole bunch more likes and a whole bunch more positive reviews and a whole bunch of downloads. And there's nothing that makes the app itself really better than the other version. It just is more popular for reasons that are probably outside of the app. So, is that successful? Well, in some ways, yeah, it is because you're going to make a lot of money, you're going to get a lot of downloads, but if it doesn't really do anything new and it doesn't really do anything useful and it might be kind of buggy, you might say, well, in some ways it's not that good. It's not that successful, but on the other hand, if you define success by like downloads and popularity, yeah, it's going to be successful. And then there's more borderline cases where, for example, just how you design the app in order to get people to give it more positive reviews. There's different ways to do that. Like when you choose to bring up the screen that says, "Oh, do you want to review this app?" Like if you don't bring it up at all, people might not. Um, they might not review it, and then less people will download it if it has less positive reviews. And then depending on where you place it, people might be more inclined to give it a positive or negative review. Like if you put it after something that makes the user feel good, they might be more inclined to um, want to leave a review and leave a positive review. And then you have these cases where, for example, some programs will make it so that if you press yes, you want to leave a review, and for example, in the app it might have a thing that says, "Do you like this app?" And if you press yes, it takes you to the App Store to leave a positive review. And if you press no, it takes you to something else that isn't the App Store. And then um, you might not be able to tell that if you leave a review there, it's not going to go on the App Store and other people aren't going to see it. It's just like going to give feedback to the developer about the things you don't like. But it can be kind of deceptive. So things like that, can actually be a pretty big deal for like how many reviews you get and how many people download it and how much money you make. So even though it has nothing to do with the quality of the app itself per se, it can have a big deal in how well the app does in terms of like downloads. So in one sense, it is really important and it makes the app a lot more successful, but it's not that important in making the app better quality or providing more functionality or doing what it's supposed to do better. It doesn't do any of that. It just gets more people to download it, which in some sense is important, but it obviously depends on the goal. And then um, another case is that you could create something that works really well. It does something very useful and it's very nice and well coded and all of that and well designed. But if you don't do anything to promote it at all and no one downloads it, maybe it just never gets downloaded at all and other people don't see it and it doesn't get popular. So, in that sense, it's not successful. But if it does what you wanted it to do and it accomplishes the goal you set out to accomplish and it makes you happy, in some ways, that could be seen as being successful as well. It all depends on what the goal is. So it's not so clear to say, were you successful? Did you win? Or did you lose? And for some more examples, imagine if you're creating a video. So you want to make a video, and how do you tell if you've done well, you've made a good quality video or not? So there's things that you could do to make it more popular that aren't necessarily related to the quality of the video. Like you could improve the thumbnail, and that can be a big deal. It can get a lot more people to click on the video. So in that sense, it's making your video more successful, but it's doing nothing to improve the actual quality of the video. So it's not doing much in that direction. And then there are things where you could actually make the quality worse in order to try to make the video more popular. So something I've heard is that people believe that a video should be a certain length in order to get picked up by the algorithm to become more popular. And I don't know if that's true or not, but some people will say things like that, and it might be true. So then if you believe that, you might choose to either adjust the length of your video, either by making it shorter and taking out stuff that you thought was useful or worthwhile, or you might make it longer and add in stuff that doesn't really need to be there. It's just there to make the video longer. So you're actually, in some ways, reducing the quality of the video, but you believe it will make the video more popular and more people will view it. So is that winning? Is that being successful if it works? Like, in some sense, yeah, if more people end up watching it, then it's better in that way. But if you reduce the quality in order to do that, in some ways it's worse than it would have been. So it's not so clear. And at the same time, you can again do the thing where you can make a video that is actually really useful and really informative and makes a lot of sense, but if you don't promote it very well, it might not get very popular. So is that being successful? Is that winning? Or is that losing? It all depends on your own individual perspective of what it means to be successful in that instance. And it's not something you can really say clearly. So for a different type of example, think about doing research. And research really seems like it has a clear goal. Like you're trying to find something useful, something interesting. You're trying to develop some new kind of information or just learn something new about the world. So it seems like there's a pretty clear goal, but it's not always so clear. So, um, it's pretty important to get published, and then you want your research to get popular, and you want people to read it and learn about it and get interested in it. So, again, there's all types of things that you might do related to that that might actually reduce the quality of your research. So, on one extreme, you might do things like p hacking, or you might intentionally manipulate or falsify the data in your research in order to make your results more compelling or more believable or more interesting. And if you can do so in a way that's not likely to get caught, then um, you can falsify that data and then make your research more popular. It gets published more easily, more people want to read it. So, in that sense, it's more successful, even if it's not actually true. And then on the other side, um, something I've heard about, and I haven't experienced it myself or anything, but I've heard that something that can happen is if you find out something, like if you say a study is published that says something interesting that might be true, and then that idea gets popular, and then you research the same thing and you find out the previous study was actually incorrect, what it found out isn't actually true. Well, your research might not be seen as interesting enough to want to be published. So even though what you found out was true, it's not actually interesting to other people, so it doesn't get published, it doesn't get popular, and in some sense, it's not good, it's not successful, it's losing. But what would you say is correct and what would you say is wrong? What would you say is winning and what would you say is losing? For some people, it might just be like how successful it is, like how popular it is. Do a lot of people view it? Does it make a lot of money? Does it cause you to be successful in that way? And even if you have to do something like falsify data in order to get there, or use very questionable methods, maybe to some people, even if you have to do that, if it doesn't get caught, that still counts as being successful, and that still counts as winning. And on the other hand, I'm sure there's people out there who feel like they would rather find the correct answer, even if that might not make them as popular, that might not make them as successful in the other way that other people see, but they care more about finding the correct answer, finding the truth, and less about becoming popular. And then for one more example, imagine a doctor. So, another thing that I've read is that there's a doctor who said that their patient didn't need this like expensive surgery. It wasn't actually the right thing for them. It wasn't. It wasn't going to help them with whatever their problem was. So, in order to improve their patient's health and make their patient's life better, the doctor provided a recommendation based on what they believed and what they knew. But the patient really wanted to get that surgery, so from the story I read, that patient then gave the doctor a negative review, said they didn't like what the doctor said. They found someone else that would say what they wanted them to say, and then um, went with that doctor because they said what they wanted them to say. So, which doctor is the better doctor? Which one is winning the game? Um, if you're a doctor and you always do what's in your patient's best interest, even if it goes against what the patient believes, then that might cause you to sometimes get negative reviews. It might cause people to not like you as much because you're not saying what they think you should be saying, and you're not doing what they believe is right, or you're not playing into what their biases are and you're not able to make them feel good in the sense of they're not hearing what they want to hear. But what you're saying might actually be more correct. It might actually be better for your patient's health. So, what what's more, what's better overall? Should you lie to someone in order to get them to believe something, to believe you, and to like you, and to support you? Or should you tell the truth and maybe people don't like you and you're not as successful and you don't make as much money? Which one's winning and which one's losing? There's a lot of different things like that, and popularity and getting people to believe you and being convincing versus telling the truth, being accurate, and being correct. That's one divide that's pretty big, and I think it's bigger than people expect. But there's also more divides and more different goals, like just being ethical, being moral, and just kind of anything. There's a lot of different goals out there, and some people aren't going to care about being ethical. They aren't going to care about being moral. They aren't going to care about being correct, and they're just going to care about being successful in terms of making a lot of money and becoming popular and convincing. And on the other end, like there's any level of balance there. Like some people will kind of care about being successful and popular in that sense, but they'll also care about being reasonably correct and following the rules and being moral to some extent and all of that. There's anywhere like you can you can land on any side of the spectrum, but depending on where you land, your goal is going to be different and the way to tell if you're being successful or not is going to be different. So it's not so clear. Now, if you're playing a game, you don't have to deal with all of that. It's very well defined what a win is, what a loss is, what the rules are, and how you play. And sometimes there can be factors outside of the game, like ways to cheat that might be hard to detect, or things like that. There might be a culture of like viewing something as a bad play or poor sportsmanship, but it might not be against the rules. So sometimes things like that can come into play. But overall, a game is going to have pretty clear rules of what it means to win and what it means to lose. And there's just not going to be that same amount of like questions about are you winning or are you losing. So a big divide, like I said, is being convincing versus being true in real world things. So a lot of this comes down to biases that people have. So in order to be convincing, a lot of times you'll want to play into the biases that people already believe. And in order to actually be correct, sometimes you have to go against those biases. So there's various obvious ones and common ones that people talk about a lot, like gender biases or race biases, or age could be a bias factor for bias as well. So if in a certain field most of the best people in that field are a certain gender, then people are going to be more biased to assuming that people of that gender are going to be better in that field. And first of all, that actually does make sense to a certain extent. Like, if that is the truth, that people of a certain gender are more common at the top of that field, then it makes sense to believe that people of that gender are more likely to be at the top of the field because it's true. But what's important is that you don't want to just believe in that bias and then disregard all other information that you can see. So you want to take in as much information as you can, including the information that goes against your biases. So even though, like if you had absolutely nothing else to go off of, then it would make sense to go off of your own biases. But if you can take in any other kind of information, that might help you to find a better answer rather than one that's just like an overgeneralization of something that may not always be true. So, uh, on the other end, like if you want to be convincing, though, it's it's a lot easier to play into the biases. Like people might have a certain image of what they think a successful, smart, or talented person should look like, or even anything else. Like people might have an image of what they think someone who does a certain job should look like. So then they're more likely to look for a person like that person that matches their image. And that image might make sense to a certain degree, but again, um, a lot of times there's going to be more to it, and you'll want to take in more information than just um, the factors that you're using that might be biasing you to one way of thinking. So, because there's a lot of biases like that, there's quite a bit of difference between being convincing versus being true. So, if you can fit people's image and play into their biases, that can often help you convince them of something. And on the other hand, if you just want to be good at what you do, a lot of times that doesn't matter. So, games for me make that really clear. Like, you don't have to worry about going against people's biases. Like, if I come up with a strategy that goes completely against what everyone believes, and no one thinks it's going to work, and um, it doesn't sound that good, and I can't convince anyone that it makes sense, it doesn't matter if I can win the game. So the outcome of the game is purely determined by my own ability to execute the skills that are required to win the game, and that's it. I don't have to like go out of my way to convince someone that I'm actually doing a good job in the game, or I don't have to try and fit someone's image of what they think is it means to be skilled at the game. I can just win the game, and if I win, I'm good. And the point isn't that I always win, it's just that for me, I'd rather have the results be determined by my own ability and my own skill. And sometimes it's not going to be enough, and sometimes I'm going to lose, and that's fine with me. I just want it to be determined by my ability to do the skill rather than like playing into someone's biases or things like that. And then that that same thing is true for anyone else out there. So I'm going to come up with a lot of ideas for what I think is necessary to become good at a certain skill. But if you disagree with me, all you have to do is like come up with your own idea, use it, and then win the game. And if you win, well, maybe you're like no one can argue with the fact that you won and you found success with your own way of doing things. So if you win, you win, and that's the end of it. And if you lose, and that's the end of it in that way. But games really provide that opportunity to have a very clear goal, a clear definition of if you won or lost, and you can really tell are you actually good at the skill itself and not just like good at getting people to believe you or something like that.